All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Cerebral Conversations. And like I always say, because they're always all special, but this one is really special because I had the opportunity of being on this wonderful woman's podcast. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and then we'll go from there.
Hi there, my name is Felicia. I am a mom of three. My middle daughter actually has a form of CP. She has spastic hemiplegic cerebral palsy. I am a stay-at-home mom. I also am a mindset coach for special needs parents as well as special needs adults. I am the host and founder of the Surpassing Label podcast, and I am starting a nonprofit organization called the Surpassing Potential Project. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell.
Nice, nice. So, my first question I normally like to ask, I can't, well, I could ask, but with you, I'm going to change it up a bit. So, since you have kids already, and your first kid, I'm assuming, didn't have cerebral palsy, but your middle child did,
Mhm.
what was it like finding out that your second child was going to have cerebral palsy, knowing that you already had a able-bodied child at home, and how did that change things for you when it came to your perspective on disabilities, and what were some of the challenges that you kind of like faced, and what was some of the things you kind of like had to deal with?
Well, to be honest, my son, he is 3 years older than my daughter. And, he was a normal, typical, developing little guy. When I had my daughter, from a very young age, I kind of had a gut feeling that something was not quite right with her development. She was really late meeting a lot of her milestones, like rolling over, being able to sit up and control her head. Um, so it wasn't until she was almost two, she was 18 months before we actually got somebody to listen to us. I went to her pediatrician multiple times voicing my concerns because I knew that something wasn't quite right based off of, how her brother had been and things were drastically different. And I know every kid is different and they develop at different times, but at 18 months, she was still having a hard time, even with head control and sitting up. And she wasn't walking or anything like that. So at that point in time, they did an MRI
Mm.
and they did indeed find that she had a stroke, probably in utero. And when we received her diagnosis, it was pretty grim because where her stroke was at, it was a small stroke, but it was where all of the nerve endings come into the internal capsule. So they call it like the prime real estate, because it can have very detrimental effects, I guess. So her prognosis was not very good at that point in time because they didn't know if she'd be able to walk or talk or have much functionality. Um, so it was a pretty devastating diagnosis to learn, because we had no idea what anything was going to look like from that point on. So it was pretty hard actually. So
Wow, that's that's I honestly I have no words because I've never really asked my mom about what my diagnosis was like. So I don't know if my diagnosis happened around the same time as your daughter's did, or if it was like something that was like, as soon as I was born, they ended up finding out. All I know is that I was born premature. I was in a incubator for a couple months, and I was really small. And then all I know is that I had cerebral palsy. I don't know anything about like when I was diagnosed or any of that stuff. So hearing what the diagnosis is, finding out the diagnosis was like from you is kind of shocking to me because I've never had to listen to that, or I've never heard about
yeah,
finding out the diagnosis that way. So
and yeah, and for your mom, it might be something that she would like to share with you too. because
Mm-hmm.
from a mom's perspective, it can be a hard thing to come to terms with. So yeah, I'm sure she would like to tell you about that.
Mm-hmm. So, and then to go to my next question, because your son is, quote unquote normal. What were some of the challenges you kind of had to deal with, raising him, because he's 3 years older, so he's like just turning into a toddler. He's got to deal with his own things, but then you have to deal with also with your daughter who's having all these other sort of things going on. So how difficult was that? How did you kind of have to like change your parenting style to like, you know,
Yeah,
like adapt?
it really was a pretty drastic adaptation. After her diagnosis, we were kind of bombarded with medical appointments, therapy appointments, specialty appointments that we never really had to deal with before. Typically, you just go in for checkups or if somebody's sick, and that's all you have to do. So, I actually, when before I had my daughter, I was a microbiologist. So I worked in a research lab and hospital settings before that. So I worked full time and I had my son, and that was kind of how we went through our days. But once she was diagnosed and I realized how involved her medical care was going to be because she had multiple therapies 5 days a week plus specialty appointments and doctors things. And I decided to go ahead and become a stay-at-home mom at that point, just because I wanted to make sure she received the care that I felt that she needed to help her thrive and develop the functionality that she could. I wanted to give her everything and any possibilities that I could. So I decided to stay at home. And for my son, things did change a lot because you know our focus was a lot on her because she had so many things going on, and he did have to go to a lot of doctor's appointments and a lot of therapies and things like that, and I always tried to be mindful and to make sure that at least, even though he had to go because I had nobody else to help with anything, I always tried to make it fun for him while we were there, you know, bringing games and books and things like that. But I know it was hard on him. And there were a lot of things that he had to give up in a sense, just so we could accommodate scheduling for her. I mean, we still tried to do the extracurricular activities that we could for him, but there was a lot of things that he wanted to be a part of that we necessarily couldn't do because of scheduling, because I can only be in so many places at one time. Um, so he did have to give up a lot. And I think in the grand scheme of things, I think it was in a way kind of beneficial for him because he saw like all the different challenges that she was going through, plus all of the other children that are at these facilities. And he has grown up into the most amazing and empathetic young man that I have ever seen, actually. So I think in a way that even though he had to give up a lot, he also gained a lot through the experiences that we've went through as a family. Um, because his perspective is very, very different because he's 18 right now and just started college.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a very, very perceptive and empathetic young man. And I'm not sure if he didn't experience what he did, if those would have developed in the same way or not. So, but it was tough. It was.
Yeah. That was actually going to be my next question, how he kind of felt, dealing with everything, but you pretty much you pretty much answered that question. And one thing I want to say too is I'm really really thankful looking back on it that my mom didn't have to, deal with my cerebral palsy alone. We also were living with my grandparents at the time. So anytime my mom had to work, my grandfather at the time when he was alive, he would take me to therapy appointments, or he would take me to anything I needed to go to. And when I was younger, I played in a challenger baseball league. If my mom couldn't take me to that, he would go. If there was any special things at school, my grandparents would always take me and all this sort of stuff. So I'm really, really glad that I, kind of had my that we kind of had my grandparents as a little bit of a buffer, so my mom didn't have to, like work part time at a place. She could work full time and make sure that we had the money to do whatever I wanted to do. And again, like I said, I was able to do, most of the normal kid things. There were certain things that I couldn't do, obviously, because of physical limitations, but I'm glad I got to, experience somewhat of a normal childhood, regardless of all the therapies and stuff, because of my grandparents being able to help.
Yeah, having that support system is huge, and if you do, it's such a blessing. So that's wonderful. I'm glad.
Mhm. So my next question is, because we I think we talked a little bit about this when I was on your podcast. Go check that out, by the way. I will have it linked in the description, and I will share it again on all the social media platforms, because I really, really think it's a good episode.
Thanks. I thought it was great. So
So, but my next question is, why did you decide to get into mindfulness coaching, out of all things?
well, after being a stay-at-home mom to a special needs child and having two other children for 10 years and navigating a lot of different situations medical wise, I found myself in a very, very not so great space. I felt very stuck, like I had no direction, like I was just stifled, I guess.
Like
Um,
your whole life was your kids, and like that was it.
it was, and it was like everything was defined by our circumstances. And I felt like I had no control over anything. And I reached a point, after something really big happened, and I'm like, I have to do something. I know that I am meant to do so much more, and I need to figure it out. But I knew that it had to start with me because I was stuck.
Hmm.
So I started looking into different things that I could do primarily from home because I didn't have the option of working outside of the house because unfortunately my children they all have medical diagnoses. Um, the other two develop things later. So if I tried to work outside the home, somebody would get sick and I would be it just doesn't work.
Hmm.
So I was trying to find something and I came across a coaching program. And I'm like, well, this sounds very interesting. So I started it and I really started working on the mindset work on me because I knew I had to go first in order for me to show anybody else the path of how to do the work. And it completely transformed everything about me from the inside out. And that's why I'm so passionate about the mindset work and how much it can actually help people get unstuck, find their direction, unlock their potential, and just help them be the people that they're meant to be. Because a lot of times we don't even ask ourselves any kind of questions to determine what we really want or who we really think we should be because we just feel like we're boxed in by
Hmm.
society. So that's why I started in the mindset work and it's just evolved ever since and it's just been amazing. It's been a wonderful path. So
That's great, and it also goes back to what we kind of spoke to before on your podcast, where I was talking about, the creativity kind of being stifled because of, you know, circumstances and stuff like that, and
yeah.
trying to, not to stifle the creativity and let them learn, because life can hit you with a few curveballs, and sometimes you may think that this is all that is, but if if you know if you continue to have that curiosity and you continue to have that mindset to go forward, you can always bounce back. So
Yeah, you can always find a way. That's for sure.
so another thing I really wanted to ask that I didn't really get to ask you last time was or I wanted to bring up last time was has your daughter ever brought up that has your daughter ever like brought up that has your daughter ever mentioned that she has like dreams of, you know, like her being quote unquote normal, like not having cerebral palsy?
You know, she hasn't actually. She's never said anything about that. I think I think for her, at least right now, I think she's accepted the fact that, there are things about her that are different that she struggles with. But I think she inherently knows that it is a part of who she is and who she'll always be, and it doesn't make a difference to her. She's the sweetest thing. But she's very strong in her opinion. She's very creative.
Mm-hmm.
She's very expressive. She's very she's like a little dynamo. A quiet dynamo, but a dynamo nonetheless. But she's very always been very strong in the idea of who she is. So she's never approached me or said anything like that. Now she does tell me about some very interesting dreams that she has like all the time, but nothing like that. So,
Okay. The reason I brought that up because I brought that up because when I was younger, you know, going into my teenage years and even like a little younger, there would be times where I would go to bed and I would have dreams and I would wake up and in my dreams, like sometimes they can be like really, really vivid depending on what the dream is. And there would be dreams where I would wake up and I wouldn't have it. And then I would experience a certain moment and then I would experience a moment and it would feel so real. But then when I would wake up, I'd realize like, oh, it was just a dream.
yeah, yeah.
And it's kind of like and then that's where I got to the point where I was and then I always mentioned to you and when I mentioned to you on your last podcast where it was like stages to where you know like in that teenage realm where I was kind of questioning it. While I was questioning it, I was having dreams like that a lot of the time where I would have the dream and I wouldn't have cerebral palsy and then I would experience certain things and be like, oh, this is cool. And it would feel like and it wouldn't feel like a dream, it would feel like real life, but then I would wake up some days and I'd be like, oh, I'm like, well, I guess this was just a dream and I kind of have to deal with this. But
Yeah.
I don't really have dreams like that anymore because, you know, I've come to ac- accept it and, you know, that this is a part of me.
Hmm.
Like, not to say that I mean, I still have like really vivid, realistic dreams, but like none anymore to where it's kind of like, okay, I don't have this. I don't have cerebral palsy and
Yeah.
I'm, you know, living a normal life to where most of my dreams are I still have cerebral palsy in my dreams, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so what were some of so also so my next question is what was it like having a third kid while also having two other kids, including one that has cerebral palsy? What was that? Because you're already dealing with your daughter who has cerebral palsy, and then you have another, and then you also have another kid as well. So what's that kind of like trying to juggle everything?
Well, to be honest, after we had my middle daughter, um, I wasn't sure I wasn't sure if I was in a space to have another child. I've always wanted to have at least three kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a dream that I've always had. But after all of her issues and things that she struggled with, I was frankly really scared to have another child. Um, but we did decide to have another child. About, well, she's 5 years younger than my middle daughter. Um, but it took a while for me to get over that initial fear. And when we did find out that we were pregnant, they monitored everything extremely closely. I mean, we went in for a lot of additional testing and they did a lot of things to make sure everything was developing, the best that they could. So that did help with reassurance and everything. Um, but since then, I mean, she's my youngest has had her fair share of struggles as well. Actually, about a week after she was born, we almost lost her. She had something called necrotizing enterocolitis, and she was in the NICU for a few weeks until she finally got better. But she's had struggles since too. But it's been very, very wonderful. I mean, she's like the missing piece of our family. She's extremely sassy and very dynamic and dramatic. But she's such a little trooper, and she's went to countless therapies with us as well. And she's always that's kind of what she grew up knowing versus her brother who kind of had a different experience and then kind of was brought into the life of therapies and whatnot, whereas she's always just known her sister as her sister, and her muscles and things don't always act as hers does, but that's okay because that's how she is. And she's always just kind of embraced it because she's grown up that way, knowing it. So I think it was a little bit easier for her, like a transition wise versus my son, who, his world kind of tilted a bit. So if that makes sense.
No, that completely makes sense. And it kind of sounds similar to what my younger sister kind of went to, because my mom had my younger sister and had my younger sister. We're like 7.5 years apart. So so growing up, she kind of just knew me as her older brother. She didn't really look at like the disability and everything. But for me, having when she was born, babies are cool, toddlers are cool, but as she started to get older, I started to like there were certain things that she started to be able to do to where I would kind of, because I mean, she's a little, I mean, she's 7.5 years younger than me, but there was when she started to hit, like her teenage years, and she was doing certain things. I started to kind of look at it like not only from an older brother perspective, but kind of like, but as a person with cerebral palsy, I was kind of like, wait, but you were really happy, and I would kind of question my mom, like, wait, you're really apprehensive when I asked you about doing this, but you're letting her do this, or why is she able to do this, but every time I bring it up, it's always I don't know, and then so a little like going into my later teens, it started like a little bit of jealousy started to form a little bit because she was starting to do all the things that I wanted to do, but I couldn't do until now going into my 30s, and it was just kind of
Mm.
and so I don't know if your daughter's kind of like I don't know if your middle daughter's kind of like seen that or kind of like been through that, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, it's funny because I have it with each of them because the oldest one, he was kind of like my trial my trial and error guy, I guess. You're starting to make these choices and you don't know if they're right or not, but you learn from the choices that you make with the first one.
Hmm.
And then as the second one comes in, you're like, okay, well, this is what I learned and this is how things are gonna look. And they're like, but he got to do this. And meanwhile, the little one's over here thinking she's a teenager already. And she's like, but Leah, she gets to do this. And I'm like, guys, it's okay. You guys are each your own people and things are gonna change and evolve. And by the time you get to her age, I might change my mind. And by the time you get to his age, so it's just a complete learning process. So as a mom, I can attest it's difficult, and I do see that, and we're learning as we go, and trial by error. And in regards to her, like, not being able to experience the same things as her brother, or doing it at a more at her pace. Um, I think she's okay with it because I think she understands, especially with like the driving and things like that. Because we have been having conversations since she's almost 15 and a half, in regards to driving and things like that. She's aware that it's not gonna look exactly like the route that her brother took. And I think it's difficult for her, but she understands. So, as we come to the more mature type of milestones, I guess, I know that as long as we are open to having the conversations, and she can express what she needs to when she needs to, and knows that we're here to support her in any way for her to be able to experience everything that she wants to, whether it's at this pace or that pace. I always like to call it her pace because she sets her own pace. So she'll get there eventually. And as long as we're open to have those conversations and acknowledge that things may look different, but that's completely okay. I think that's helped her a lot.
Mhm. So
So
we're just gonna keep it to another couple of questions because the timer is running pretty low. I may need to invest in the Zoom Pro so we don't have any, so I don't have any more time limits. But at the moment, I cannot. I at the moment we're just gonna have to stick with the 40 limit time limit. So I'll just keep it to like one or two more questions because I know you're a busy person.
you're fine.
So one of my one of the last few questions I have, actually before that, one thing I wanna say is, based on speaking with you, I really think that because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I wanted to bring this up to you before, but I really think that you should interview my mom, so that way you can guys can like bounce
That's
stuff
a great,
back and forth with each other. I think that would really be interesting and entertaining to
yeah,
listen to. So
yeah,
I'll definitely when I get some time when she gets off of work today, I'll definitely bring it up to her and see what she thinks about it.
yeah, just have her get a hold of me. Yeah, absolutely. I love interviewing people.
So one of the last few questions I have, since since dealing with sounds wrong. Since being involved with cerebral palsy and interviewing parents with kids that have cerebral palsy or adults that have cerebral palsy, what have you learned from them that you can take and like use from yourself, and what have they learned from you, do you think?
Mm, Well, I think what I have learned from them is just the power behind people actually being able to share their stories. I have seen just about everybody that I've talked to, just the actual action of them getting their stories out. Um, because I've interviewed a lot of people, not just with cerebral palsy. I've interviewed other people that have a bunch of other different things going on. But just getting their stories out and knowing that they're being heard and they're being seen for who they are completely. And I am embracing everything with that. And hopefully, all the listeners out there are too. I think that has such a healing property. And I was not aware of like the impact of that when I first started this journey. But I can just see it at the end of our conversations. It just seems like a lot of times a weight has lifted. So that to me has been one of the biggest things that I've learned and I've seen. And it just really, really makes my heart feel good that I can hopefully help somebody in just a small way like that. So, and I hope what they learn from me is that every person, no matter who you are, no matter what you've been through, no matter what your diagnosis is, every person deserves to be seen and heard, loved and respected and embraced for the amazing people that they are. And that every person has the potential inside of them to create any kind of life that they want. And they do not have to be defined by their situation or diagnosis because that is not the only part of who they are. There is so much more to everyone. And I hope they can walk away taking a little piece of that feeling with them, knowing that they can create more if they choose to do it. So I hope that's what they take away.
That that was that that was definitely great. And for the people who are gonna listen to that, really listen and understand that just because you have things going on and you may have a disability or this, that, and the third may happening and you may be feeling stuck. Just know that there's always people, that there's always someone, like I said on your podcast, that you never know who's watching.
Yeah.
You may be going through a tough time, but someone who also is going through a tough time may look at you and use you as a source of strength.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
just always be aware that someone's always watching. So,
Yeah.
and if you need that light at the end of the tunnel, I can be the light at the end of the tunnel for you. If it's me, she can be the light at the at the end of the tunnel for you if it's her, or um
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
So one of the last things I want to bring up is one of the last things I want to ask is there any questions that you have for me?
Well, I think my biggest question for you would be what do you really want in life?
Honestly, that's a question I get asked a lot, not just from you, but from other people. And
Yeah.
when I was younger, it was okay. When I was younger, it was okay. I want to make a lot of money. I want to do this and I want to do that. But then as I was started to get older, I started to realize, that's like those are kind of superficial things. And then when I started to work with my mentor in finance, we can, that's a whole nother podcast we can get into, because I can't really get too deep into it because of compliance reasons. But um but once I started working with my mentor, and he always asked me, what's your why? And
Mm-hmm.
I never understood what he meant. But basically, when I started thinking about it and I started, doing this, I started to kind of understand, maybe this is what I've been wanting to do, and I can, maybe it's to be a voice for people with disabilities, people that don't necessarily or can't necessarily do for themselves, or or don't think that they have a voice. I can be the voice for them. I can
Mm-hmm.
be the voice for them, and if it's doing this as well as, and then also trying to help them understand about finances and stuff like that, and then use those two in conjunction, to build a business or just help people in general. That's where my headspace is. That's where my headspace is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that sounds very good. I love that. And I love that you're using your voice to help others. So it's
Yes.
amazing.
Yes, and it's been quite a ride, and it's been a journey. I've been able to meet great people such as yourself. They're doing these interviews and posting my content on TikTok. who knew that just me posting, push up challenge videos would get people inspired, which I still find crazy because all I'm doing is just posting what I do on my day to day, and people find it inspiring, and it's cool to see because for the longest time I used to hate being called an inspiration because it would be for something it would always be for something super basic. The way you picked up that fork and decided to eat that macaroni and cheese that inspired me to, and it would be stuff like that. But just to see that, like just from me posting my workout clips or posting clips from these interviews is like gotten people to say like, oh, you've helped me get through this tough time, or you've helped me want to start working out more, or do this, that, and the third. It's really been humbling and really
Yeah.
exciting to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're able to impact other people and help them. So that's huge. It's really powerful. That's awesome.
So again, I want to say thank you to the wonderful Miss Felicia for being on this podcast, for being on my podcast, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to interview you and to also be on yours. Again, like I said, I highly recommend that you guys check that out.